Um, let me start by just kind of giving a little backstory on kind of how I got here and the conversation that I had with Dr. Dworkin. He invited me to come here. I was excited, an opportunity to speak to students. I've done that at a bunch of other universities because I really think that politically speaking, it's important that you understand all the things that are happening from a political and governmental standpoint in New Jersey, because you will shape the future of that. But I also wanted it to be the most engaging opportunity possible and not stand up here and speak for 10 or 20 minutes about New Jersey, but really have a conversation around what's going to change, how I view it, and why I'm running. Paige did a good job of telling a little bit about my backstory here, but when I got involved in politics, in many ways it was accidental. After I came back from Iraq, the mayor at the time asked me to run for office, trying to fill out a county line. I registered to vote that day, and I ran against then Congressman Menendez. I like to tell people that I told you then what would happen, but that's another story. But needless to say, one door closed because I wasn't successful there, but it opened my eyes to a lot of different opportunities. And 20 years later, here I am as the longest serving mayor of Jersey City in the last 70 or 80 years, and we've seen a tremendous renaissance there. It begs the question on why I'm running for governor and how I think it's going to work and how we're situating the campaign. When I ran for mayor, it's important to realize that I ran against the entire Hudson County Democratic Organization, which, if you understand New Jersey politics, that is not a small thing. It was actually also the only election in the country, other than Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, that then President Obama endorsed. And he actually endorsed my opponent because my opponent was one of the first people to support him when he ran for president in 2006. So to be able to organize from a grassroots level and actually overcome all of those headwinds, I learned a lot in that process. And I learned a lot about how to connect with people on a day-to-day basis with regards to a campaign and organize around that. And that's exactly what we're trying to do on the gubernatorial front. I started 2 years early because I believe that in order to be successful in changing New Jersey, I need the time, 2 years, to organize person by person in every county, not relying on the traditional county organizations, and to actually engage from a political policy, more policy than anything else. And that takes time as well. It would be silly to think that you can engage in a gubernatorial race 6 months prior and be successful. The only way to do that is to be beholden to the structure that exists for a long time in New Jersey. And we fundamentally want to change that. And I've been spoken about that at numerous times. So we started the campaign in April of this year, and the campaign has been built around mayors. And that's for two reasons. First, it's because I am a mayor, so I have a familiarity with that. And I understand that mayors are very, very important. But secondly, it's because I believe that mayors are the most important level of government from a political standpoint. I mean, if you ask any child in elementary school anywhere in the country, they know two political offices. They know who the president of the United States is, and they know who their respective mayor is. So in order to build from a grassroots standpoint, it was important to me to start building with credible messengers who are mayors across New Jersey. And we've been building that. And we've had a tremendous number of mayors actually sign on and say, I am endorsing him and supporting him 2 years early. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. It is a crazy thing for me to ask somebody 2 years before an election and say, I would like you to stand out there and support me no matter what the landscape looks like. And it's a crazier thing for somebody to be willing to say, yes, I am going to do that. And people are doing that at a very, very, very high rate. We've had a lot of mayors on board, more coming on, which speaks to the fact that we've been able to do a lot of things in New Jersey, in Jersey City. Now, let me talk about what I think we've done in Jersey City. In Jersey City, I think the biggest attribute, or the two best things that I've done, is I've hired a very, very effective team of professionals, but we've also all been very courageous and willing to push the envelope. And that there is a gap that I think that New Jersey can do better on. You think about a lot of the things that New Jersey touts, whether we're progressive on minimum wage or paid sick leave or casinos or cannabis. Those are all things that actually didn't happen from political courage. They happen through referendum, they happen through the courts. And what I think we can do better is push the envelope. And our track record in Jersey City is doing that. Whether you look, we were the first in the state paid sick leave. We were the first on the minimum wage front, on healthcare policy, the first on decriminalization of cannabis. I mean, Jersey City's track record is bar none the best. We're at the forefront of policy agenda. And I think we have an opportunity to do that in New Jersey. I say at all of these things that I do not think New Jersey is broken. I mean, we choose to live here, but I think there are a lot of things that we can change on the policy front, and we are leaning into that. Our structure of the campaign is that every month we are put forward a policy agenda paper. Now, most campaigns are very vague, and they're intentional because every time you go out there with policy, there is risk to that. And we've intentionally taken a different approach. If you look at how we've structured the campaign, it is the most robust, detailed policy agenda that you will see in any campaign anywhere in the country. Every month we come out with a different initiative. Next week is public safety, and it is robust. 20 pages for those who want to read it. Transportation, 16 pages of policy changes and why we would change them. And I think that that's going to be our ultimate roadmap to why New Jersey will be a better place in 2 years. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll turn it over to some questions, Dr. Dworkin. And I know we have some scripted questions. I'm okay with really any questions, so it doesn't matter. We could wing it. There's nothing that's really off topic here.
Okay. These questions actually
I know they wrote them, right?
They wrote them.
Yeah. Okay,
people
great.
wrote them down. They submitted them, right. And I had to just compile them. We had several questions here, but I do want to just start with this because the theme of this speaker series, of which you're now a part of, sir, asks about a vision for New Jersey. So you get elected. Let us assume for a moment you have 8 years. What does New Jersey look like at the end of the 8 years?
Okay, so you want New Jersey to ultimately be regarded as the best place in the country to work, to raise your family, to stay. And there are a lot of affordability issues around people making a decision on whether they can or can't stay in New Jersey. And there are a lot of reasons that tie into that. We started our policy initiatives around housing because housing is at the forefront of every challenge that you have in New Jersey, particularly around affordability. People talk often about taxes as the reason that New Jersey is unaffordable. But the reality is that taxes are a part of it, but housing supply is a key part of that as well. Because if you go out when you graduate and you look for a house in a specific neighborhood and you can't afford in your $500,000 budget or $400,000 budget, and you are pushed beyond your expectations initially to buy a house for $500,000 or $600,000, that is a toll that you pay every single month. It's the same for renters, and that deals with housing supply. We talked about transportation was the second one because the investments in transportation, going back to what I said earlier, have just not been bold enough. When you think about investments on how you integrate North and South Jersey, how you move people from urban areas to suburban areas, the commitment around that has been a lot of rhetoric. That's the honest truth. And I think we can change that. The next one is public safety. And I think that from my standpoint, I think there are a lot of things that you could change to change the narrative on New Jersey to make it recognized for the great place it is and actually further the opportunity to have the growth that we've seen and that I grew up in, that I hope that my children have an opportunity to grow up in. So making it really the best place to live, to grow a family, and to work. And I think there are policy changes that can achieve that.
Let's talk about some of those policies. We had a couple questions that came in our students are going to be looking for jobs. Everyone's concerned about the economy. And obviously New Jersey has a pretty delicate economy in that we're often reliant on both the strength of New York City and Philadelphia. Much like Jersey City, when New York City and Wall Street's growing, Jersey City has had tremendous success. So what does New Jersey need in order to grow? What does New Jersey need to do to grow the state economy?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think that you need wholesale change around how you approach taxes and property taxes versus income taxes. I don't think that there's been a constitutional convention in New Jersey for 50 plus years. We've actually taken a look at how we approach property taxes from residential to industrial, commercial, how we integrate our relationships with whether it be Philadelphia or New York, and actually take a different role in how we empower some of the municipalities on fees to drive revenue on their own side. So I think a lot of the economic situation is looking at it from a broader tax situation, but also at the same side, empowering some of the different municipalities on the local level.
So just so that I understand,
sure.
What do you mean? Are you talking about that?
I think one of the challenges for us to drive revenue on the local front is I would want more flexibility from the state in what I can do from a tax standpoint, and that doesn't.
So you want to be able to create a local income tax?
I don't know if I will. Well, we have a local surcharge today, right? Because the state took away some state funding and then gave us back this surcharge a couple years ago. But I think that there is no flexibility for municipalities other than property taxes, and municipalities should have that opportunity. I think on how you integrate housing into municipalities, okay, and how tax abatements and pilot structures work to encourage that sort of growth and development and economic opportunity. Today, those tools aren't there for local municipalities because it becomes a very political process, and the laws from Trenton don't empower local municipalities to allow the flexibility to do that stuff. And those are things that you could change. They grow the local the local economy, which ultimately empowers the larger economy. I would just go back to something that you said about Jersey City, that being tied to the New York market, which is true, no question about it. But when people say that Jersey City is the prosperous last 10 years that we have are obvious, I say that Jersey City has been there for 200 plus years, okay? And the last 10 years has been like no other. And a lot of it's because we've changed the narrative around the city and how we've grown. And a lot of those lessons we could take broadly, I think, to other urban areas and frankly, some of the suburban areas as well.
Lessons such as?
Well, let's start with like tax abatements. I touched on this earlier, right? Okay. So tax abatements today in every municipality become a very political conversation because how they have to be enacted on the local level. In our housing policy, we say that we would change the law from Trenton to allow you to get, when you become mayor or council or whatever the form of government is, the municipality is, that you allow the DCA to approve an overall plan for how those things are.
Just so the DCA is the Department of Community Affairs, which oversees municipal
When you
governments.
look to grow housing in New Jersey today, you have economic tools that are possible. Most of them are driven out of Trenton today. You don't have local flexibility. So if you look at the EDA programs, you are beholden to the policies that are set at Trenton. And what I would tell you is in most situations, mayors know best what's in need for their local municipalities. When you look at, let's say, the pilots, which is a payment in lieu of taxes, which is the best incentive tool in order to grow housing across New Jersey, the way that that works to incentivize to use long-term tax abatements is that it becomes a hyper-political process because each one is approved individually, as opposed to having a blanket policy that each municipality has that avoids the political rhetoric of it, is basically what I'm saying around that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Did I lose people on that? I felt like I might lose some people on that, but
it's good. They should learn about this stuff.
Okay.
Just sticking on taxes, we had a couple questions that related to people in Trenton have to operate from the state perspective. That's why they're there.
I think Trenton, what Trenton does to us, I just want to go back to this, is on the local front, you see a lot of unfunded mandates that come out of Trenton that we have to carry on the local front. I mean, they've put in place laws around changing lead lines, right? Noble, important, burden for every municipality with a timeline and no dollars associated with it. You know, you talk about some of the requirements of a police department and different divisions that we have to have, requirements from Trenton, but they're cost to taxpayers that we have to implement on the local level that I don't think are thought through from Trenton. So yeah, they're there, but I think that their goal should ultimately to be empowering the local mayors more to be able to make decisions on their behalf. And if you believe that every economic decision and the vitality or the viability of New Jersey growing is based on some of these small municipalities growing, and in aggregation, the state economy grows, you need to empower those mayors to be able to make those decisions. It's just the way I look at it.
When you've got a situation, The last 2 years, the Democrats in control of Trenton have made affordability, which you just mentioned, their key centerpiece, their theme. And one of the things that they've done is that they believe that targeted property tax relief programs like Stay NJ, the Anchor program, that these are ways to make it more affordable for families across the state. Now, there are others who think those are gimmicks and we just need another constitutional convention, more fundamental tax reform. Do you think we need a convention in order to do that? Do you think those programs are going to work?
I think that there are a lot of programs in Trenton, and it's difficult for the regular person to connect all of them on how they are used for them. So I do think that you need a fresh set of eyes and wholesale change on how property tax is approached in New Jersey. I do believe that. I think adding more of these different programs that tend to pop up right before election time with rebate checks and are a little bit complicated for regular residents, I don't think are the best way to restructure kind of property taxes in New Jersey. I think you need a wholesale conversation with a constitutional convention.
Okay. So I want to shift now mass transit, because we got a question here about it, and you talked about it. I saw your plan about it. For all those, you've obviously been a strong proponent of improving mass transit in this region. We often joke that we wish we had mass transit to improve because it just doesn't exist. So what are your thoughts about how to increase mass transit options in this region of the state, which obviously has a lot of different needs than, say, a more urbanized area like where you're from?
Yeah, well, I would start by saying that a lot of the mayors that are supportive of me are also committed to mass transit, and they live in suburban areas. So it's not only urban mayors, right? I think in Jersey City we have a lot of unique assets that we've been able to leverage that others don't. But if you look at our transportation plan, it deals with the funding around transportation and the commitment in a couple different ways. And that pertains to North Jersey or South Jersey. First is we were the first ones in the state to advocate for the CBT, which is the additional
corporate business tax.
Correct.
It's a surcharge for corporations.
To be a dedicated revenue stream for New Jersey Transit. New Jersey Transit is currently looking at a $1 billion gap in funding. And that will ultimately lead to less riders because there's going to be less service. And you create a death spiral in the system where it ultimately doesn't work. New Jersey needs to be reasonable and understand that we need to make a commitment with a dedicated revenue stream. Nobody says it. I mean, everybody says it, but nobody does it. Now, that CBT is $1 billion that is a tax on the largest corporations in New Jersey. You are talking about Walmart. You are talking about Amazon. It is not something that is hit by the mom and pop type of employers. It's just not. So from my standpoint, and we've advocated for this, is that those taxes have been in place for 5-6 years, and all of those companies have done exceptionally well over those 5-6 years. And the tax is normalized already into their balance sheet. It's a part of their expectations. So it's not an additional tax coming into them in 2024. So to let that fade away is a problem. That's number one. Number two is we've talked very much about congestion pricing. I disagree with the governor on that. You can't say that you are for the environment and that you are for getting cars off roads and then at the same time be absolutely against congestion pricing. Those two things do not connect ultimately.
Again, I just wanted to make sure that we all understand congestion pricing being a policy largely imposed by New York that people who are coming from New Jersey into New York have to pay extra.
Let me say that I do think there should be broader congestion pricing, that we are putting fees on New York when they enter New Jersey the same way. Okay? And the reason for that is because if you take a step back beyond all of this rhetoric around about a tax on commuters into New York, it's 2% of the population that can afford to commute to work in their personal car every single day to and from. Regular people do not drive their personal vehicles to work in Midtown Manhattan every single day. Regular people take mass transit, and you need to figure out ways to invest in mass transit and be fair. If we are going to improve New Jersey, you got to get away from saying just the political rhetoric of congestion pricing is bad and actually think about how do you leverage a policy like that to benefit New Jersey Transit and invest in it, whether you're in North Jersey or South Jersey. The policy of New Jersey Transit go further than this. They outsource their bus lines. They outsource their bus lines to private vendors. There is a fundamental disconnect on that. That happens whether it's in North Jersey or South Jersey. It's a fundamental disconnect when you are giving dollars to a private vendor to operate a transit line that you know loses money, because the private vendor is incentivized to cut service as minimum as possible to squeeze every dollar out of that contract. That's not the mission of public transit. Public transit anywhere in the world does not make money. And you need to understand that as a government standpoint. You need to understand that you are investing in a service to move people around to grow a local economy or the New Jersey economy. So if you look at the policy plan that we have, it's detailed. And I think it's bold, and I think it's fair, and I think it actually speaks to the fact on how do you change transportation in New Jersey to make the economy grow. So bring that back to the first question.
So one of the things that your plan doesn't get too specific on is something that affects this community quite directly, and that's
the light rail.
Yeah, the Glassboro-Camden light rail line. Is that something that you believe should be paid for by the state?
100%. What we do talk about in the plan, and I don't single out all of the different light rail opportunities or train station opportunities, is how do you fund the system so they can make investments statewide? And we need to get past this kind of mindset a little bit where we're polar opposites between North Jersey and South Jersey, and because he got something and she got something, then he didn't get something, and we're constantly fighting. If you are going to invest in transit and make the economy grow in New Jersey, you need to be investing throughout the system in transit. And the changes that I'm advocating for and investments that I'm advocating for benefit everybody in the state, regardless of where you live. Because the policy initiatives are not saying, I'm just going to build this Glassboro line because I'm trying to placate somebody. What I'm trying to do is saying, how are you going to fix New Jersey transit so it is a better system and a model for the country and serves everybody?
Taking a little bit of a shift, another part of our economy in South Jersey is offshore wind, which obviously took a big hit recently when Ørsted decided to pull out from its projects. And in addition, largely, offshore wind used to be a very bipartisan issue and now seemingly has become a very partisan issue. So what's your perspective on this industry? What kind would your administration be as focused on it like the Murphy administration?
The honest answer is we're doing a lot of work on it right now, okay? And trying to understand a little bit better around the different issues. I mean, I don't subscribe to the fact that, the whales are dying, and I don't subscribe to any of that. And I think wind energy and alternative sources of energy are of paramount importance to New Jersey, okay? And what I'm trying to understand a little bit better is who are the vendors that we're working with? Why are they chosen ultimately? Why is it 9 miles, not 15, not 30? The different arguments that are there. And it's frankly very, very hard to get concrete and direct answers from a lot of people here. So if you ask me, is wind energy good? Yeah, it's important for the future of New Jersey, and I'm a big supporter of it. Can I tell you that the structure that Governor Murphy has put in place today is the best? No, I wouldn't say that because I'm not as familiar with it as I should be.
Totally different tact. Somebody always submits this question. Why are you a Democrat?
Well, look, who submitted that question? Let me take a step back, and I will tell you what I believe democratic values are, and that'll tell you why I'm a Democrat, and I think my actions in life speak to that. I come from a family of Holocaust survivors. 35 of my family members were taken to Auschwitz. 28 died, 7 survived. They immigrated to this country. So first and foremost, I come from a family of immigrants, and I believe that I have a lot to be thankful for the things that this country has given me. That's number one. Number two is my family, my father and mother. My father has a deli in Newark my entire life growing up, and my mother next door had an immigration services business helping other people get immigration. So it's at her core belief as well, as far as what she believed and what me and my brothers grew up believing. When I graduated college, I got a job at Goldman Sachs, and after 2 years of doing that, when 9/11 happened, I looked at my life and said, what do I want to do and what do I find important? And I thought, service is important, and I always said that service was important, and I have a lot to be thankful in. So I went to my managers at Goldman Sachs, said I was going to leave, going to enlist in the Marine Corps, and was subsequently deployed to Iraq. Why do I tell you this? I tell you this because in my belief system, the party that speaks to the most vulnerable people the immigrant community, the people that don't have, that try to help those people move forward is the Democratic Party. And that is consistent with my core beliefs. Whether you think about having a big tent and empowering people that don't have opportunities and creating safety net programs, I think the Democratic Party does that the best. And that's why I align there.
One of the issues that popped up in the most recent election involved school districts. Several school districts throughout the state are now mandating that parents have to be informed if their child asks to be called by different pronouns than those originally assigned at birth. Matt Platkin, the New Jersey Attorney General, has filed suit against several of these school districts, arguing that their actions violate the state's law against discrimination. And even though we should understand the exact number of cases where this is happening is still small, if it exists at all, the issue itself was certainly part of the political discussion. So we had this question: how do you view this issue, and how should it be addressed?
Generally, look, I have my bio said 2 children. I actually have 3 children. I have a 3-week-old daughter at home.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. So hey, thank you. It's really my wife you should be clapping for. But let me say, as a parent, I want to be involved in every aspect of my child's education and my child's growing up. That's how I feel. And I feel that there should be constant communication between teachers and parents. And the only way that a parent should not be informed is if there's a clear risk to the child. And that would be something that would have to be structured in a way that, and aware, but the default is that parents should be kept in the loop. That's just my general feeling as a parent of young children and where I fall today. Now, let me say also this, because this speaks to the LGBTQ community. We've had a perfect score in Jersey City from the Human Equality Index, which rates municipalities for the last 10 years on LGBTQ plus issues. We have been at the forefront of countless issues empowering our LGBTQ plus community, whether it is covering health benefits for trans care, or whether it was having a division in the police department in order to better liaise between the community and the police department. I mean, Jersey City has been at the forefront of this conversation. So when you ask me about informing parents, I try to speak fairly and honestly, and as somebody who's also been a huge supporter to the LGBTQ community, and somebody who understands that kids that are struggling with identity and how their parents are at home are certainly at risk. So I don't take that lightly either. And that you look at homeless children and children that fall into difficult situations often struggle with family relationships. But the default for me should always be that parents are engaged where possible. And that's how I feel about this. So that's where we are.
One of the this parental rights notion and informing parents was the issue this year. A year ago, we were talking about sex education in this state. And there was significant efforts to allow parents, as you were just talking about, to opt out, have their children opt out of a sex education curriculum imposed by a public school. Do you agree? Should that be something parents should be able to do?
Whether parents should be able to control if they opt in or opt out
if their child takes or opt in or opt out of the sex education class.
I mean, I don't know the legislation or what you're referring to, the specifics of it, but the default is what I said earlier, that parents should be involved in their children's education. And so I don't know the specifics of what you're saying on whether it's kindergarten or a senior year, but generally speaking, I feel parents should be involved. Yeah, I think that parents should be involved, and it's important to family structure.
All right, New Jersey is currently embroiled in a court case involving de facto segregation with its public schools. And what's interesting here is that even if people agree there's a problem, no one really there's no consensus on what the solution would be. So it's a two-part question, I guess. Is there a problem with segregation in New Jersey public schools? And if so, what should be done about it?
I mean, I think the data in the courts have decided that there is a problem. I think that's very clear. So there's no question around that schools are segregated in New Jersey. And I think that the solution ultimately will revolve around more county schools and magnet schools that share some population. And I think ultimately over time you will desegregate that way. And I think that's ultimately where we'll head as a state.
Do you have a problem with segregated schools in Jersey City?
Do we have a problem with segregated schools in Jersey City? I mean, we weren't part of the court case, but I think that you would have certain schools that are certainly, yes. I don't know if you would say segregated is the right word for that, but I would say that definitely more predominantly African American or predominantly Latino and less white in certain communities, for sure. And I guess if that is how the courts define segregation in this particular court case, then I would say that the answer then is that we have problems as well.
You have made your career in public service, in political public service,
Yep.
In the very rough and tumble world of Hudson County.
Yep.
So one of the things that our students continually talk about is civility in politics and why it has seemed to disappear, even in their lifetimes. Has civility disappeared from public discourse in your mind? Is it tougher now? Is it meaner now? And what can be done about that?
Is it meaner now than
Previously.
When?
Not the Civil War. I'm talking about within a generation. Let's put it this way, sir. In your lifetime.
Is civility eroded between how elected officials treat other elected officials or how the public treats elected officials?
Well, let's handle both.
Okay. Well, I think that social media has definitely changed how the public treats elected officials. Okay. And I think that having the opportunity to engage with people in an anonymous way has certainly led to less civility. Okay? With regards to how most elected officials engage with each other on a day-to-day basis, I think you haven't seen an erosion in civility. I think that what the media publicize are the people that have showed that because it leads to viewership. But fundamentally, when you have conversations with people in different parties, I don't think that has changed for me over the last 10 or 15 years.
As a follow-up to that, leaving aside lack of civility, say between the public and how they treat or perceive politics, is there anything else that disappoints you with New Jersey political life? I'm not talking about a policy, but just sort of how New Jersey practices politics. Is there something that is just disappointing and you'd like to see changed?
Well, look, I think that the structure in New Jersey creates obstacles for people to get engaged in elected office because we've talked about the county line structure and how New Jersey works. Okay, so I think that does create an obstacle for young people to get involved. I think it's a very, very expensive place to be involved because of the media markets of New York and Philadelphia, so that's an obstacle as well. And those are things that, I would like to change, though. I mean, I can't change the media market, but you can change structurally how you get people engaged at an earlier time and change the system so they have an opportunity to actually run for office and grow.
I'm not even sure the answer myself, and I'm sorry, so let me just ask. One of the things that New Jersey has done to deal with the high costs of running for governor specifically is that we have public financing. Is your campaign going to engage the public financing system?
We are going to engage the public finance system. The public finance system in New Jersey is a 2-to-1 match for every dollar you raise. It'll roughly be up to $3 million, I suspect, and you get $2 for that. So it equates to roughly $9 million in total, and the agreement is that you'll spend only $9 million. So with the limits of fundraising that the gubernatorial accounts allow you to raise at, $4,900 is the maximum donation that somebody could give to you. In order to not go into public matching funds, you would have to be able to raise more than $9 million in $4,900 checks. That's the math on how to make that work. And that's a very, very steep hill to climb for anybody. So I would suspect that most people who are running for governor would go into the matching funds program, including me.
Generally, there have been two approaches to reducing the cost of higher education in New Jersey. The first is to increase aid to colleges and universities. And in fact, Rowan, just for what it's worth, receives far less per student than almost every other four-year state school. So I'm going to take my opportunity to plug that point. But the second approach is to reduce costs for students by giving directly to students, tuition aid grants and things like that. It's easy to say do both, but do you have a view on which of these should be prioritized, how we can make
Between
college?
what are the two choices?
The two choices, giving money to the schools, giving money directly to students.
Yeah.
Is there, yes, we can do both, but do you have a philosophy or a view on how this should be approached?
Yes. So first, I will tell you that every university I'm at, whether it's Montclair or NJCU or Rowan, everybody says we get less money than everybody else. So somebody is not telling the truth. I just want to start that as a starting point.
It's the other guys. We're telling the truth. I just want to say that.
Obviously. Let me say that we had a nice conversation earlier with Rowan leadership about funding at the state, and they had a lot of very, very good points around TAG grants and how the state funds higher education. And they spoke to the reluctance to change the program from the legislature and the governors in the last several administrations. And it is something that I would like to lean into and learn a little bit more, but I think that the conversation was very robust, and I think that how we fund directly to universities and change based on the cost of the universities seems to me to be a disconnect on how you are funding some of the universities overall. I would also say that I think that to me the system is broken in that the system incentivizes universities to load kids or high schoolers with debt and with grants, with no accountability from the university for what the ultimate outcome is for those. So as I was saying earlier in the conversation, that there always is another crop of juniors that you could have a conversation with about the following year. And the debt remains on that student, whereas the university tries to find new dollars from that. And to me, there needs to be some accountability from the university as well, that when you are taking a student on and you know that you are helping them accrue debt, that should be a deliverable as far as an employment opportunity afterwards. And now how you mesh that together is a broader conversation, but I do think in higher education, there is a disconnect there that needs to be addressed. So going back to it, I think there's both sides. I think that the state needs to change or revisit how they fund universities, but I also think there needs to be a different set of accountability from the universities on how they deal with students for that amount of money.
Thank you. One of the things you mentioned in your opening remarks was about the legalization of cannabis.
Yes.
And it's clearly been one of the most significant accomplishments of the Murphy administration. You've been outspoken in your opposition to police officers using cannabis, even when off duty. For those who oppose you on this, they argue the point is it's now legal and it's simply like alcohol. You don't tell the cop he can't have a beer, but you're telling him this can't be in their system. Even Nick Scutari, who led the fight for legalization when he came to this university, thought we shouldn't have this kind of carve out for cops. So can you explain your view, and more importantly, how would you convince those who are in opposition to your view?
Well, let me start by saying that I think most reasonable people, that when they hear the facts of what I'm saying, say, actually what he's saying makes a lot of sense, okay? Let me start from the premise that when people equate cannabis use to alcohol use in a professional setting, it is not a fair comparison. And the reason it's not a fair comparison is because you can test somebody for alcohol immediately and know what they have done in the previous 5-6 hours. You look at their blood alcohol level and you will know whether they're inebriated or not. There is not a test in the world which would tell you if somebody has consumed cannabis an hour before a shift, a day before a shift, or a week and a half before a shift. And that is a fundamental problem in certain professions. Now, New Jersey happens to be the only state in the country that doesn't have carve-outs. So that should tell you something in of itself. Every other state has carve-outs for certain professions. Put law enforcement aside for a second, okay? Let's say you called 911 because you were having a heart attack, or somebody here was having a heart attack. Wouldn't you like to know that there were some regulations around that person that's coming to respond to your 911 call, that they didn't maybe eat some gummies a half hour before they got on their duty? Wouldn't you like to know that? I would. Would you like to know, when you trust your child on a school bus, that they're taking your child to school or taking care of your grandmother, that they just didn't consume cannabis 5 minutes before that shift? Most states have a carve-out for certain professions. Law enforcement is something that I actually have oversight of. We have 1,000 officers in Jersey City. Now, police officers make split-second decisions that often can result in life and death. Now, the litigation that we're discussing is over the fact that there is significant liability to Jersey City if we allow somebody to carry a firearm while knowing that they consume cannabis. That's what it's about. I can't control the carve-outs from Trenton. As I said, Trenton does a lot of things that doesn't make sense, but I can control whether a police officer has a firearm. Federal rules are very, very clear. ATF rules are very, very clear that police officers sign when they get their firearm that says they will not use a Schedule I drug. Cannabis remains a Schedule I federal drug. So if, God forbid, something happened with a firearm and immediately that person is tested for cannabis use, and they used cannabis whether a day before, a minute before, or a week before, we are liable. Tens of millions of dollars. So the court case is about the fact that it's not fair to expose us. If you ask me about the broader conversation, should there be carve-outs for other professions, I think a reasonable person in New Jersey would say, yeah, there should be carve-outs. Now, who's opposed to me? Who's opposed to it? The police union is opposed to it. Why do you think the police union is opposed to it? You could figure it out, okay? And certain legislators are opposed to it. But I guarantee you, if you ask any normal person on the street how they feel about the 911 operator showing up that just had cannabis 5 minutes before responding to their call, they would probably say, you know what, I prefer they didn't have that, or I know that they didn't have that. And that's the fundamental part of this argument. And I think that we're ultimately going to win in court. I know we're going to win in court because the federal law is very, very clear. It's just a matter of going through this process, unfortunately.
As governor, can we dig a little deeper? Who else gets the carve-out? Is it anybody who drives a car for a living?
I mean, Penn, you ask, would you parental notification, should you have sex education, like a broad topic. It's not fair to just have this broad sweeping kind of conversation because there's a difference on it. I don't know all the professions that have carve-outs, but there are professions that should have carve-outs, and it's a conversation. But I think that a reasonable person in Trenton even would say, yeah, there should be some barriers or protections for regular residents that they know when somebody that they trust as a professional is responding to a duty, or they are giving their loved ones over to that they should know that person's not inebriated. If you told me there was a test for cannabis that could tell you whether, the same way of alcohol, whether somebody was consuming it a week or a day before, and we could delineate that, I would say, fine, then no carve-outs. Same rules as alcohol, but that doesn't exist. So we got to base our decisions based on what the reality is, and that's kind of where we are there.
One of the other things that the Murphy administration has been pushing, is trying to make a big accomplishment, has to do with electric vehicles, which the state has now put forward a proposal that as of 2035, all new cars sold in New Jersey will have to be EVs, electric vehicles. Prominent critics have said this is an unrealistic goal, that the electric grid can't even handle that kind of charging use if everybody had to do it. So do you support this 2035 electric vehicle standard? And what's your view on the whole issue?
So let me say that no city in New Jersey has built more charging stations or more infrastructure for electric vehicles than Jersey City, okay? Public, private, we're transitioning our entire vehicle over to electric vehicles. We're the first in the Northeast to have electric garbage trucks that pick up your trash. I mean, so we are committed to this. However, the reality is in 2035, Governor Murphy will not be the governor, right? So it's easy to say we're going to do this by this date when you're not there ultimately, right? So what I would say is that the big test is going to be over the next 12 years, what type of infrastructure do they build? If the infrastructure remains as it is today, look around the state where the charging stations are, it's an unrealistic goal. It's just not realistic. So if you build capacity for charging stations, if you build grid capacity, then perhaps you could incentivize people to get there. The second thing I would say is the key word is incentivizing. I think generally speaking, people respond better when you find ways to encourage them to make a decision from a financial standpoint, as opposed to coming at them with a heavy hand of saying you will no longer do that. And we've tried to do that in Jersey City wherever possible and let the market dictate then how things progress.
Okay. One of the things, issues that came up, something that's always been big here, and I guess in northern New Jersey as well, we had questions about the efficacy of tax credit programs run by the state to ensure companies don't leave, large companies, don't leave New Jersey, or to bring new large companies here. In fact, I always found it fascinating, though we didn't get it. New Jersey was ready to offer about $5 billion in incentives to Amazon to have their East Coast headquarters located here. The critics will go out and say it's ridiculous to give $1 million tax credits to $1 million companies. Where do you come down on this debate?
It's another tough issue, but I will tell you from experience in Jersey City, when I was elected, every single development project had a tax abatement, had a massive tax incentive. And I came in and I said, we are going to change how that works. We are going to phase them out because I don't feel that you need those same incentives in order to encourage development. We have a lot of other assets that we can sell. The development community said to me that they will not be able to build, the economics won't work, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't given out a tax abatement at this point in close to 8 years, okay? So we've wholesale changed how development works in Jersey City, and we have led the state every single year in housing construction. We actually build 6 times per capita more than New York City builds. So look, generally speaking, I think a lot of those incentive programs are races to zero. And you've seen that in some of the research that has happened around those. So I'm very skeptical of those. The last program of incentives, particularly around housing programs, you're going to have close to $1 billion in tax credits that will finish this administration unused, just because the way it's structured from a criteria standpoint doesn't work on the ground. And that goes back to what I said initially as being a mayor and understanding that. So I think the tax credit programs are flawed, generally speaking, right? You need to be very selective and targeted and very rare. And I think that the programs today need change because economically they're not going to work in doing what their intended purpose is.
Given one of the things that we had in my class, I'll just share this, we had a state legislator come in, and one of the questions people were talking about was why anybody would run. I mean, it just seems, all you do, you can't, person was talking, it's like, I can't go shopping. I can't go shopping. It happened to be a female legislator. She's like, I have to put my makeup on. I have to dress up just to go out and, to the store for 5 minutes. People yell at you. You were talking about that because of social media. So this question, why should young people look to run for political office?
Well, look, I think that it is a noble calling where you can have an impact in your community that is meaningful. I think there are very, very few professions that you could have such a profound impact in changing the dynamics of an entire city, an entire neighborhood, and individual families. And this is a unique calling that allows you to do that. And so I love it because it allows me to engage people day in and day out, and it allows me to work on problem solving in a lot of different facets of life that touch people. And when you see changing somebody's life in a better way, it is very rewarding. And at the same time, I look at it as saying that what I said earlier about I have young kids, and I think a lot about what the world's going to be like for them and how to make the city that I live in a little bit better and the state that I live in a little bit better. And I think about that a lot. I'm as invested as anybody in this because I have kids that are going to be here for the next 20 years, and I want it to be the best place for the next 20 years. Hopefully they stay at college here, but I can't control that.
We'll provide the incentive. I promised the mayor that we've got one final question, but before we get to it, I promised the mayor that I would open it up to the audience, anybody who has a spur of the moment question. Is anybody else?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, sir, my name is Vincent Giusulo. I am from Olbers, New Jersey. I just wanted to ask you, you were talking about a lot of things, but there's one thing that really concerns me as a younger voter. It's taxes. I honestly worry that I won't be able to afford to live here in the future.
Yeah.
Because if you look at, according to the Tax Foundation, have the highest corporate tax in the nation. If you look at TurboTax, we have the third highest state income tax in the nation. So, possible to run a business here, very hard. Taxes. We're also talking about congestion pricing. That's another tax on top of that. And you have income tax, also take a little bit out of the income. And you were talking about how we should. You were talking about the corporate tax and how we should the way it is. Why do you think we should the way it is? Why can't we just eliminate the corporate tax entirely or lower it?
Yeah, because I think you would create, as I said earlier, particularly around New Jersey Transit, you have $1 billion gap. You will create a death spiral in New Jersey Transit that will be a massive tax on regular residents. If you do not keep that CBT in place, somebody will pay that $1 billion. The choices are either you pay it, they pay it, the larger corporations, or we cut services. Those are your three choices. That's it, right? So the best options for me are not cutting services and not having you pay it. The best options for me are those people that have been paying that tax for the last 5 years to continue to pay it. The argument that it's going to impede their progress falls on deaf ears because they've had it for the last 5 years and they've done exceptionally well. So that's the only reason I'm saying that it works and we shouldn't give them a tax break in this environment. A tax break on that CBT in this environment will be a tax increase on you as a regular resident. That's the equation, because there's only one way to fund that $1 billion gap, and that is to find additional money. And additional money means somebody is going to pay it. So everybody's just got to make choices. Who do you think is the best person to pay it or the best organization?
Thank you.
We're now heading into the end, and so...
She had a question. I asked her.
Somebody else?
Paige's mom, I think. Okay, all right.
He had a lighthearted question for you.
Yeah, sure.
Phillies, Mets, or Yankees?
This is the wrong place to ask that question.
You're in South Jersey now.
Yeah. Look, I've tried to be straightforward with all of you. I'm a Yankee fan and a Giants fan. So
We forgive you.
Look,
Okay.
I'm trying my best on this campaign trail to be honest with people, okay?
There you go.
And say, here's what I think, and let the political chips fall where they may. And maybe that's not the best answer in this room, but it remains the answer. So.
And we appreciate that. Yeah, we got time for one or two more. So, all right. So, Ryan.
Obviously, Rowan. I'm from Marlton. So you talked earlier about your desire to kind of do away with the original county line system or the current way that elections are run. I think I can speak on behalf of a lot of young people in New Jersey where we kind of are leaning the same way, or where we are, I guess, unfavorable of the line. We think that it can contribute to unfair elections. So my question is, how do you plan on doing that? How do you plan on, overrising the line? How do you plan on achieving that?
It's working its way through the court system now. So there's a legitimate chance it changes without legislation. Look, I understand the arguments for it, but I think a reasonable person would look at the data around it and say that it empowers a few people at the expense of the many. I think that a reasonable person would come to that conclusion. It is hard to argue when you look at numbers that incumbents haven't lost in a very, very long time throughout New Jersey. And that is not a trend anywhere else in the country. And that leads you to the conclusion that there is something probably wrong with our system. The best approach is working ultimately with those county organizations to change how they view it, and that's based on relationships. And ultimately, you would hope to find something that's codified in Trenton that makes it more fair, that when you look at a gubernatorial candidate, it's here are the 4 gubernatorial candidates, and you choose one of them. And here are the 4 assembly people, and you choose one of them. And yeah, you could still have your slogan underneath it, but fundamentally, you want to create people that have equal opportunities. And I think it doesn't work like that today. Look, I am the only one saying that from a gubernatorial candidate perspective. Going back to what I said, I mean, I am going to run this campaign doing the right thing every day. And it may not be the political right thing, but I am going to be committed that after June, I sleep well at night, win or lose, that I know that I did what I feel that my moral compass told me to do. And that's the way I'm doing it. That's the way I'm approaching it. And I think ultimately it's going to work to my advantage. And if it doesn't, I'm okay with that. But I'm going to say in things that I think are just better for New Jersey.
We've got one question here.
Good evening, Mayor Fulop. I'm Mario Barone. I'm from Voorhees. So my question to you is, a little earlier, you talked about the idea of getting alternatives to municipal taxes. You wanted property taxes to be shifted away so that we'd lower them. What kind of alternatives are you talking about?
I mean, what I would tell you is that our entire tax plan is in February, and I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but it allows more flexibility on municipalities. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get too into it at this point, because we have like a whole rollout schedule for everything that we do, and I think that it's important to kind of keep integrity to that.
As we've now hit about an hour of you being there, talking and answering questions, we have this, our traditional exit question here at RIPAC. Mr. Mayor, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were just starting out?
When I started out and was 26 running against Bob Menendez, I was very naive to the process in New Jersey. I didn't understand how county lines work. I didn't understand how people have different interests overall. I didn't understand people's different motivations and agendas. And I think as I've grown a little bit older and become more mature and been involved in politics and government more, I understand that more. I don't like it necessarily, but I understand it. And I think that that would be the starting point that I didn't fully appreciate when I started and was very young. The second part is that change is very slow, unfortunately. And the system is in place and it's set up in a way that change is very slow. And it is hard to get people to engage, to change from the status quo. That is a very difficult thing to get people to accept, because people are comfortable with what they are comfortable. So even when you tell somebody that this will be better and you show them why this is better, I have found it's very, very hard to get them there. And for that reason, change very, very slow. And at times it's frustrating.
On that note, let's thank Mayor Steve Fulop. As a token of our appreciation, Mr. Mayor, you now get your genuine, very own RIPAC t-shirt, very thing. And let's just say with our slogan on the back, workforce development for democracy, which is what we do here. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it.